Hi, and welcome. For this episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with Monique Ross. Monique is a certified nature and forest therapy guide and the award winning author of This Working Life: How to Navigate Your Career in Uncertain Times. A journalist by trade, she worked for Australia's national broadcaster for more than a decade before a career 180 helped her reconnect with her true nature. As the founder of Heartwood Nature Bathing, based in Brisbane, Minjan, in Australia, she helps people and organizations slow down and connect with nature in meaningful, therapeutic, and restorative ways. Her superpowers are organization, grit, and making pasta disappear. So help me welcome Monique. Monique, welcome.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I'm connecting with you from way on the other side of the world and in a different hemisphere. I'm in central New York, as you know, and here it's about -8 Celsius. And I know, and we just really the first full day of winter today. So, how about down where you are?
Down where I am, it is Sunday morning, so it's 7 o'clock in the morning. It is already very hot. So we're in our summer, and it is already a really, really hot, humid, sweaty summer. So we're kind of opposite, I think.
Yes, I think so. Well, right now I'm looking out at looks like it's going to be a white Christmas time here where I am. So maybe I can get down to where you are and get some of that warmth.
We can trade. I will trade you my really hot summer for your beautiful white Christmas.
I'll send you some photos. How's that?
That sounds beautiful. I can
Uh,
envision it.
all right, great. Well, so I've been looking forward to this conversation. So maybe we can just start by just you letting me know a little bit about what it is you've been working on or toward lately.
So I am a nature and forest therapy guide, which effectively, if you've ever heard of forest bathing, that's what I do. So I kind of take people out into nature. I help them slow down and kind of access all of the healing benefits of nature and the ways that nature can help in leadership is what I'm really interested in at the moment. So I've got a corporate background. I worked for a really long time as a news journalist. So I'm really used to that really high paced, fast, stressful workplace. And then just during COVID, I kind of burned out really badly and went, something's got to give, like something has to change here. And that was the start of my journey to retraining in this field. And really, this work in nature has changed my life so much. And now I'm really passionate about taking what I know into workplaces and kind of working with organizations and managers and teams, so that what happened to me doesn't keep happening to other people. Because there's so many tools out there that we can use to combat stress, to combat burnout, to work better. But we just need to know how to access them. So that's kind of what I'm doing in a nutshell at the moment.
Oh, lovely. I can't wait to dive in a little bit further there. So I'm curious, what inspired you? So you were burned out in your corporate life, and right around that time, COVID, the pandemic hit. So now you're in forest bathing, certified. So what inspired you to this line of work?
So I knew really early on, I knew I needed to do something totally different. I'm kind of all or nothing. So I'm like, if I'm not doing journalism, it's got to look totally different. And I was looking at anything I could do that would put me outside more because I recognized that in my 9 to 5, what I was doing was every time I was really stressed and I felt like I was about to explode, I was going out into nature. So I was hiking and I was camping and doing all this stuff to get me back outside. So I was really focused on how can I do more of this? And wouldn't it be amazing if my job was outside? So I started looking into all the different things that might look like doing bush regeneration or being a hiking guide. I'm working in a nursery. I was looking at retraining in horticulture for a while. And then I read about forest bathing in a book. There's this beautiful book called Phosphorescence by Julia Bard. And it's this tiny little line in a chapter that just mentioned forest bathing. And as soon as I found out about it, there was something in me that knew. I'm like, that's what I want to do. And I think I recognized that spark because I was so burned out that I hadn't felt that energy from work in a really long time. Like I remember sitting in meetings and I was like a digital lead. So I was kind of in a strategic position and we had to go to meetings and talk about what was our vision for the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years. And there was one meeting right before COVID broke out and I just had nothing. I was sitting there totally drained, like totally detached, nothing to give, no ideas. And I just burst into tears in this meeting because everybody else had this huge vision. And I think I knew then there's something wrong. And when I read about forest bathing in that book, I got that energy, that real motivation like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to be passionate again. I'd forgotten. So once I read that, it was really quick. It was like 2 weeks later, I'd applied for a certification. I
Wow.
moved swiftly and it all kind of lined up beautifully because I had some long service leave. Um, so I took a big chunk of leave. I took 3 months off my work and used that time to kind of go, is this actually what I want to do? Yes. Okay. So I left my job and never went back and slowly kind of built up my own business doing this.
Wow. What an amazing story. And it's at some point way down the road, uh, something you said really resonates with me, and that is I had a pivotal moment in my career as well that hinged on the results of a meeting that I was in at a particular point in time. So a story for another day. But so what else do you do? Is forest bathing and nature therapy and being a guide for others, is that what you do full time?
Almost, almost.
Almost.
So, I also teach basket weaving,
Okay.
weirdly. I've discovered this incredible, craft skill that I just love, and other people love to learn it too. It's very mindful for me. So I take it outside as well. We sit around in groups and we learn to weave, which is something that I think is in our DNA as humans. Like this is a skill that stretches back forever. So I've incorporated a bit of that, and I still do a little tiny bit of freelance journalism and writing, just to kind of bridge the gap. But I'd say I'm about 80% forest bathing now, which is pretty incredible.
That is really, really awesome. And it's so wonderful and fulfilling to be able to make a living with the things that you're passionate about.
Yes. Yes. And it's incredible. I think like if you had have told me back then how much I'd be earning now, I would have been like, oh my God, what a failure, because it is a lot less. Like a forest therapy guide isn't raking in huge money. But when I'm not stressed, when I'm, really leading with heart and from purpose, I need a lot less money. Like I don't need to do all the expensive self-care things anymore. And so I've adjusted down a little bit, but I'm so much richer in other areas like my time and my energy and my creativity. I'm really rich in those areas and I've found that I think we need a lot more money than we actually do. Like we can actually survive very happily on a lot less. You're just kind of taking the cream off the top.
Right. It is remarkable how that quote unquote works, if you will, right?
Yes. Yes.
So maybe you could just, do you mind walking me through what I know there's no typical experience that people have when they go and do you call it a guide or a tour or an experience? What is the language
Yeah.
that you use to describe
I tend to call it a wander.
a
Because I
wonder?
called it a walk for a while,
Okay.
but people have the idea of walking, people think, "Oh, we're gonna go really far, we're gonna," and so this idea of wandering, of just kind of like floating around a space or sauntering, I like those words, Um, so if you were coming with me, we would start by I'd do a little spiel at the start, I guess, of what you're actually doing, because most people that come along, they don't actually know. Like, it's quite a new thing for a lot of people. So most people that sign up, they don't really understand what they're signing up for. So
Okay.
I'll kind of tell them what I'm about to tell you, which is, so I'll explain that forest bathing is about just slowing down and kind of soaking or bathing in the space that you're in. So no one's actually going to get wet. Unless something goes horribly wrong, there's no getting wet. And then I'll do a little, like a guided relaxation with people. So we'll tend to walk into a nice shady area, and I'll help people just actually slow down. And that's about some breathing and then kind of waking up our senses. So I'll start to help people go, oh, what can you hear right now? What can you smell? Can you taste anything? What can you see? And we start to wake up those senses that are actually dormant for a lot of people. And from there, once you're in that space and you're kind of really awake to it, we then go on a really slow walk. And I'm talking like, if this experience goes for 3 hours, we might only walk one kilometer or a mile.
Okay.
It's really slow. And I'll offer little prompts or invitations along the way of what people might notice, which could be like, as you're wandering, reach out and touch things, like explore the different textures. Or it could be noticing the light or noticing different colors, listening as you walk. So we'll do a little bit of that. And then in between those invitations, we kind of gather around and we share something about what we're noticing. So in a group, we all have a chance to kind of say, oh, I saw that, or I heard that, or that made me think of this. So it becomes this kind of collective experience, even though you're having it individually. There's that group element as well where you're being sharing and you're being witnessed in what your experience is. And then at the end, we have tea and snacks and we have a chat. Um,
That would be my
it's a
favorite
really
part, probably.
lovely, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really nice. And I try to make tea with things that I forage in the land. So
Mm.
if we're walking around, I'll see a plant that I know is safe and I'll brew a little tea. So we're kind of drinking from the land that we're on, which is really special, I think.
Yeah. Very nice. Yeah. So, one of the things I'm a little interested in, you mentioned sort of taking in the five senses, right? Kind of getting people grounded there, and then an experience of noticing what's going on around you, perhaps. And one of the themes with some of the clients that I work with that they're interested in is their own authenticity, how they show up as leaders and how they think about themselves and the delta between how they're thinking about themselves and how other people experience them. So authenticity feels like a really important element here for a lot of leaders that I work with. So from your perspective, how can nature or forest bathing help someone become a more authentic leader? I know it's probably a
Mm,
pretty big question, but what do you
I
think?
love that question. Oh, I love it. I think for me, it's about the way that nature kind of it opens its arms to you exactly as you are. Like there's this beautiful saying that nature continuously invites you to just be who you are. So when I go into the forest and I am in a terrible mood, I've had bad sleep, I'm really foul, nature's just there. And it's exactly the same way it receives me if I'm in a fantastic mood and I'm in love with the world. It's constantly just saying who you are is enough and you can be who you are and it accepts you. And for me, that kind of belonging and acceptance is that has really helped me be more authentic in the world because I've had that experience of going somewhere and just being totally embraced for who I am. And I think about when I was working in my old job, like authenticity is something that, I used to talk about really valuing in other people. Like I want to have a manager who's really authentic and I'm going to follow a leader who's being their most authentic self. But when I went to work, I put on this mask, right? Because I wanted people to think I was really composed and professional and intelligent. And so I wasn't actually being authentic. I was afraid of that for myself, even though I wanted it from other people. And I think that that kind of way that nature just lets you just be you is a really good starting point for carrying that whole self into the workplace. Um, I think that there's also some lessons in there around presence because
Yeah.
so often, like I've been in so many meetings or on calls with people, and you can just tell that they're not there. They're thinking about where they're going to be next or what they've got to do or what's for dinner, but they're not actually present with me. And I don't want to like that's not a leader that I'm going to want to follow or who's going to inspire me because they're not actually there with me in the room. They're physically there, but mentally they're gone. And so for me, this idea of forest bathing and building presence with where you actually are, that's also a really powerful tool for leaders because you can be in a room with someone and really be there and really listen. And I think when you come at conversations or anything from that space, they're so much more meaningful. Like it just goes to this much more beautiful place because you're really paying attention.
Yeah, you just reminded me really of the awesome power of being seen and having that experience. And I never really made the connection between sort of how nature, how I'll express this, treats me,
Mm,
with that full acceptance and that being seen. It just feels like
mm,
a really powerful way to move forward. And I also really appreciate that idea of being present as
mm.
well. You
Yeah.
know,
There's something like I think when I really noticed it during COVID actually, when we all kind of moved to video calls and all of a sudden you're on a Zoom call with someone and you can see a little glimpse of their background. Like I'm talking to you on a video call now and I can see a little bit of your background and all of a sudden for me it was like, "Oh, I'm finding out tiny little things about these people that I work with and starting to get a much more fuller picture of who they are as a human. And maybe I can see like a plant in your background or a sporting trophy or some art or a book. And it starts to pad out that picture of who you are as a person beyond what you do at work. And for me, that was really powerful because it feeds into that authenticity and this idea that leaders and managers, they're real people too. I think we get scared of kind of showing that wholeness of who we are. So yeah, I think it's really beautiful when you can show up in this full kind of full self way.
yeah, and I'm this doesn't come originally from me. I know I've heard it a lot during my life, and that is that nature helps us to reconnect with ourselves. And I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think it's partly the society that we live in, right? Like we live in a society with a productivity bias, like kind of hustle culture is held up on this pedestal and you are rewarded for that kind of go, go, go mentality. But in that kind of setting, you lose the ability for that quiet, reflective introversion. And that's the space where I think you really connect with yourself. And so I get a lot of people, particularly like, the kind of C suite executive types that come on these walks with me. And they are like, I actually haven't just stopped in years. And they'll have some big revelation there because all of a sudden they've had the time to reflect and think and tap back into what they're feeling in their heart or in themselves. So I think we don't kind of do that enough. And it's really powerful when you can do that. It's amazing what people kind of tap back into when they
Right.
come and just sit quietly with nature.
Yeah. Do you mind exploring this idea? So you mentioned that you take C-suite people through these experiences, and
Mm.
I'm always fascinated at that. As a former kind of two-time C-suite person, I think oftentimes we think about people at that level, if you will, right? Using that term very loosely, as sort of having it all together and kind of the steely exterior and, all
Mm.
business all the time, that sort of aura. But could you talk a little bit about what happens when you take people who we oftentimes think of that way through an experience like this? What do you notice as the guide through all
Mm.
of that?
I would say the first thing I notice is that they're kind of a little bit more hesitant than the average person. Like they probably
I'm
don't
sure.
spend a lot of time and they think, oh, this sounds very woo woo. You're going
Yeah.
to make me do
Yes.
something really weird. But I think, I think it's actually, we're hardwired to connect with nature. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that connection. But it's really easy to remember it. So the things that I do with a C suite executive is exactly the same thing that I do with anyone coming in, any other person. We sit down on the ground. So I'm taking away all your creature comforts. We're just going to sit down on the ground. And for me, that little act of just like taking a CEO and saying, sit down on the grass. And they sit down and there's something that happens. Like nature is a very equalizing presence. There's something that happens when you sit with someone in nature and the power barriers, the kind of stature and different structures of the way that we organize ourselves, they just melt away. And all of a sudden, it's just two people sitting together. And then maybe a little bit more hesitant when I say things like, we're going to do a grounding meditation. And they're like, oh God, here we go. But when it's just like, listen to what you can hear and they listen to the birds, they do start to tap back into it pretty quickly. I think it's something that's really easy for them to remember, like, oh, when I was a kid, I used to love doing this. The trickiest thing I think is that they don't have a lot of time. And so I'm trying to get them to be like, phone off, not thinking about work, just let it go. And they're like, oh, but literally when we finish this, I've got to rush off to this meeting and I've got to be prepared for this. And so that's the trick for me, is to kind of hold them in that space of just being where they are, and kind of getting people out of their heads. Like we spend so much time up in our heads, and forest bathing really is about trying to switch off that analytical thinking part of your brain and drop into a sensory sensation, to be in the body. And when you are someone that is holding a lot of information and demand and pressure in your head, it's hard to just switch that off. So I tend to offer a few more prompts, kind of faster paced changes between what we're doing to kind of keep them engaged. But really, I think they experience it the same way. I think they need it more than most people, or like it's more important potentially for them to be doing it, because then the top down trickle effect of them doing it is that they'll then go and lead better, show up better, be more creative, all these different things. But I love it. I see the C-suites as a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
Gotta win them over.
Yeah, they are a bit of a puzzle to crack oftentimes. Uh, But my experience is fairly similar to yours, and that is if you can get them past that initial hump of this is just some out of bounds woo woo sort of feel good thing, that there's a real tangible value and real results that you can get from this experience that you're going to encounter. I think that makes a big difference. But I think you're right. And it sounds like you've kind of made a little bit of an adjustment to accommodate at least sort of that ultra cerebral way of approaching
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Yes, and there's so much research I often give them before we start. There's so much research into how spending this kind of quiet, reflective time in nature actually makes you more productive and actually helps you work better and have better ideas and increases your problem solving. And there's so much of that. So if I can say, hey, I know it feels like this is maybe a waste of time, but actually, this is going to help you work so much better, that kind of brings them over the line sometimes too.
Really nice. So I keep going back to this idea I have in my mind. You mentioned when we were talking about the language that we use about the experience, and you mentioned the word saunter, which sort of registered with me because it's sort of a word you don't hear that often. So I'm thinking, from striving to sauntering. That's sort of
Oh, love that.
the back and forth there. What do you
Yes, I
think?
love that. I think that's beautiful. I might steal that.
You could you it's yours to take if you want to use
Oh,
it.
amazing. Yes,
Well,
yes, and you still get somewhere. It's like you're not doing nothing. I think that we've forgotten that doing nothing is actually doing something as well, right? Like when you're doing nothing, ideas are happening. And there's this wonderful research that I love that talks about why you have often really good ideas when you're in the shower or doing your gardening, but you're away from the desk. And it's
right.
because your brain can make different neural connections when you're not actively thinking about something. So, kind of, if you're trying to solve a problem or come up with a new idea and you're really thinking about it, your brain's doing one thing, but when you step away from that, other things start to happen. And I think that that's just so powerful. Like when you're doing nothing, your brain is still making all these connections. And I love that. So, it's like striving to sauntering. I'm stealing that.
Do it. I look forward to it. Well, and that really resonates with me quite a bit as well. So, just that whole the idea of just slowing down a bit, and it can be really, really challenging, particularly for, again, I'm someone who's very cerebral, sort of up in my head quite a bit. And it can be but I find that when I do slow down, right, thing I make more progress. I'll give you a really simple example. Yesterday evening, I got frustrated with the lid on my coffee maker because it wouldn't go on correctly. And rather than fight against it like I normally would do, I just stopped and took a deep breath and I moved really slowly to put it back on. And
Mm.
by seemingly by magic, it just worked. So I always get the same results, regardless of whether I move fast or whether I move slowly. So at this point in my life, still trying to figure out ways to slow down, and I'm learning a lot from chatting with you. I appreciate that.
Yes, I also need I keep learning this. And when I talk about forest bathing, I talk about it as a practice because it is really hard. And I think we need to acknowledge that. So we have a practice called a sit spot, which is
Okay.
essentially just going outside, finding a place to sit and just doing nothing and just kind of noticing what you notice around you. And that's a beautiful practice. It pops up in lots of different kind of mindfulness modalities, but it's really hard.
It is.
I used
It
to, when I
is.
first started, set a timer on my phone because I was like, I don't want to miss even one. I don't want to be here for 21 minutes, only 20. As soon as the timer goes off, I'm done. And I'd find myself, I'd get to like halfway through that and I'd have to check my phone to be like, how long has it gone? It must be nearly 20 minutes. Like I was so uncomfortable in this idea of doing nothing. And I still get like that sometimes, even though I do this for a living. So I think it's that practice of like, if you find yourself rushing through or frustrated like you were with your coffee pot lid, can you just bring a bit of slowness in? And what might happen there? Just bringing that curiosity to it, I think, is really important way to just start doing the slow
Yeah,
because it is hard.
totally agree. You know, so in forest bathing, right? It's not simply a saunter through the forest, right? With a few little interspersement of activities and things that are done. There's an actual mechanism at play there, I think. And so I'm just curious if we could chat a little bit about maybe some practices or some of the how,
Mm.
what is the mechanism or how does it work?
Yeah. So, in my kind of branch of forest therapy, so I'm certified through an organization called the ANFT, we have something called a standard sequence. So, it is actually a little bit of a formula, I guess, of how we work and what we do, which is that we start with that introduction. And in Australia, we do an acknowledgement of country, so an acknowledgement of our traditional owners. we do that meditation, and then we have that little series of invitations where we get into our senses. So a really, really simple one that you can do is to, like, I like to do quite creative ones. So you might go for a walk and imagine that your whole body is an ear. So you're listening with your whole body. And maybe, like, what can you hear with your feet as you walk? What do your arms hear? And you're just kind of shifting your focus a little bit. And you're obviously, really, you're still hearing with your ears, but maybe you hear other things in other ways. It could be go and get to know a tree, and you can get to know a tree in any way that's good for you. So for some people that I've walked, they'll go and give it a hug. They're
Mm.
really kind of developing this very intimate relationship with a tree very quickly. Some people might sit and look at the tree. Some people might draw it. Some people might touch it and feel its textures or notice its tiny little details, smelling its bark or its leaves. So there's all these different ways that people get to know that tree. Um, so really, it's practically just about, instead of looking at something and thinking like, what species of tree is that? Thinking about the science and I wonder what function that tree serves and can I eat those berries? Having a more felt relationship with it. So something that you're feeling as opposed to that analytical thinking about it. And when you do that, when you approach it in that way, I think nature can be really great at kind of holding a mirror up to ourselves, right? Like, you and I can look at the same leaf and we'll draw a different meaning from it because we're looking from different perspectives. So
Right.
when you're wandering out in nature and you get into this like a more experiential way of being in nature, it shows you things about yourself. It holds up that mirror. And that kind of reflection that happens in forest bathing is, I think, what sets it apart from just going on a walk where you may be looking at things. It's there's lessons there and messages that come through. Like nature teaches us. And we talk about, so I do forest bathing, but my actual qualification is as a forest therapy guide. And I am not a therapist.
Yeah.
We talk about, so I'm the guide and nature is the therapist. And so my
Ah,
job as the guide is to kind of open the doors for people so that they can walk in and receive that therapy or be in that therapeutic relationship with nature. And it's incredible the ways that nature shows up for people. Like, people see all sorts of messages and symbolism, and they see what they need to, um, which is really incredible. I love the way that I often take a group of, say, eight or 10 people through, and we'll all look at the same things, and we all come away with such totally different reflections. And that to me is really incredible.
wow. Yeah. What a powerful message. And you mentioned forced therapy. Uh, what is the terminology you used?
Yeah, a forest therapy guide. Yeah.
Forest therapy guide. So, if what is involved in becoming a forest therapy guide?
So I did a 6-month certification. So I did
Okay.
6 months of study.
Okay.
Um, I did it online because COVID was happening.
Sure.
And it was actually really great for me because my organization is based in California. And so it meant that I didn't have to fly across the world to do this training. I could kind of do it in my own. And
Right.
so we learned all about all sorts of different things. So you're obviously guiding groups of people. So we did like first aid and kind of a little bit of psychology. You learn about kind of being trauma informed, and for some people and some cultures, touching nature is really deeply uncomfortable. And for other people, it's really confronting to close your eyes for a while when you're outside. So we learned all these different things about how to approach that and how to facilitate an experience that's good for everyone, and being really mindful of the language that we use and the way that we invite people to do things. Like, nothing that I'm going to ask you to do is ever an instruction. And I'm really clear, like, you don't have to do anything that I say on these experiences. Like, if you want to do something else, go for it. But I'm going to give you ideas. So all that kind of thing. We learn about our own natural area around us. So we learn about plants that we can use to make tea with, what's safe for foraging, what kind of birds and animals and trees and plants are around us, so that we know the story of the place where we are. And we can kind of weave that story of place into the work that we do. And then a big part of the training is just about spending time doing what I'm going to take people to do. So I do a lot of forest bathing myself and kind of build up these relationships with the places that I guide, which sounds really woo woo. It sounds really wacky, like, oh, I'm in relationship with this botanic garden. But the more time you spend in a place, the more you get to know it. You know it in different seasons and times of the day and different weather. And I actually really strongly get a sense now when I go to a place that it welcomes me there because it knows me. And there's this incredible research now, recent research that shows that trees can recognize different, I think it's electromagnetic fields of people and different things that visit them a lot. So they're not looking and going like, oh, there's Monique with the red hair, but they maybe recognize my shape or my energy, which is just so incredible. So it's very,
Yeah.
I found it very deep training. It was very introspective in parts, and I loved it. It really was this immersive experience for me that it was totally different to what I expected it to be. I thought it would be really like, here's how to do public speaking, and this is, you got to get your clipboard, and this is kind of like how to run a business. But
Right.
instead,
You're
it was
right.
like, go and sit outside and connect with yourself and connect with nature and connect with other people. And it was really profound for me.
Yeah. How lovely. You know, what you just described reminds me of my experience when I started down the pathway of becoming a certified coach. I had an expectation. And then when I went for my first session, it was totally and completely different from what I thought it would be, and in a very rewarding and fulfilling way. So thank you for sharing that. That is terrific.
You're welcome.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things I wanted just ask about a little bit is when you're leading a saunter or a walk, do you get the benefit that you think your participants get? And I'm asking that because, a lot of times people who facilitate activities or experiences, it feels sort of like work. And, I'm not really learning about what I'm facilitating, but feels a little bit different to me if you're following where I'm going there. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we talk about this idea of having one foot in the experience and one foot out. So you're
Ah,
kind of straddling because if you go 2 feet in, you're not really guiding people, right? You're kind of in it with them and they don't have a leader. You're just one of them. So we try and be one foot in so that we can get a sense or a taste of what they're experiencing. And we respond to what the land is offering. So we want to be really present with the land so we can pick up on things that we might offer other people. And when I've got that one foot in, I also do a lot of kind of modeling. So if I see a plant that I know has a beautiful, soft, velvety texture, I'll make sure that I touch it so that they can see what I'm doing and then they might touch it too. I kind of model what's possible for them. And then with my foot out, I'm kind of focused on the leading things like not losing somebody in the forest. Are we all together? Is everybody here? Is there anything we need to, like, what's the footing like? Are we going to trip over something? Kind of all the safety, the admin, what time is it? Am I on track with my timing? All of that stuff is in my mind as well. So I kind of flip in and out of it. I find that at the end, I do have a benefit. Like often, like there has been times when I've woken up in the morning and I'm like, I do not want to go and do this today. I'm so tired. I've got all this other stuff going on. I don't have time to be present with people in the forest. And then at the end of it, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. I needed that so much. So I do get a benefit from it, but not the full experience. Um, which I think is good. And I go and do forest bathing with other guides so I can just be a participant and kind of get in that space. We a lot of people describe it as like you kind of feel a little bit lost in a good way. Like you're just wandering around and you're a bit out of it. You're like, oh, wow, look at everything's so beautiful. You're in this different space to reality, not totally lost. You're not, it's not like being on drugs or anything like that, but you're
Right.
just a little bit out of reality.
Yeah.
So I like to be in that space too, but I go and let someone else take me there.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate that 1 foot in and 1 foot out piece. What it points to me is just the discipline it takes to be an effective guide. I mean, that's a lot of self-management going on there, kind of that 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So there's a lot of respect here for that.
Yeah, I love it, and it's also quite hard sometimes to be in it and kind of modeling the experience for people if you're not yourself having a great time. I've
Yeah.
done one experience and it was bucketing down rain. Like, it was really raining and I was like, this is just so uncomfortable for me. But the outside view is that I am having a great time. I love being in the rain. I'm splashing around. I'm living for this. And because I'm like that, then it carries into them and they're like, "Oh, it's actually okay. It's fine to be out in the rain." And if I model that having a great time in the rain for long enough, I do have a good time and it kind of shifts. But there's definitely moments where I'm like, okay, or maybe I've got, something else going on at home and I'm stressed and you've got to model this very calm person. So that it is challenging sometimes, but I think that it's almost that fake it till you make it. And sometimes a little bit of faking it actually does change how you're feeling about it and changes your perception. And for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Monique, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation this morning for you and this evening for me. I have a little bit of a reflective question I'd like to offer if you'd be willing to take it on for just a moment.
Sure.
Yeah. So, as you kind of reflect back on your professional life and experience as a striver, a journalist, kind of sitting in the big meetings, and now as a forest therapy guide. Right? I'm just curious, what is the leadership lesson that you have learned? What's the most important one that you've learned from your experience with nature?
Ooh, that is a very good question. The first thing that comes to my mind, and I'm going to share the first thing because this is what we do. We say, don't try and overthink it. The first thing that bubbles up is the right thing to share. For me, it's about trusting that who I am is enough for other people and that the way that I lead an experience or what I bring as my unique person is enough. I think that, there's a lot of flexibility in guiding for people to do it in their own style. And I had 3 trainers, so 3 different people that taught me. And when I very first started out, I was trying to be them, right? I was trying to be them because I loved the way that they guided. I thought they're incredible guides. Um, but they're a little bit more kind of serious and reflective than I am. I tend to be a bit more playful and fun in my walks. And there's room for everyone.
Mhm.
There's room for all the different styles. Well, we're like a little forest in an ecosystem that is kind of most strong because of its diversity. So I really found that as soon as I stopped trying to be them and stepped into my own authentic kind of way of guiding, it was a lot less pressure on me
Hmm.
because I can just show up and be me instead of trying to mask and be someone else. But I found that it was better received as well because I think people can tell when you're just being you and when you're kind of arriving from that really authentic whole place. And sometimes that means that when I forget to say something or I've messed something up or that we go the wrong way on the trail and I'm like, "Oh no, we have to turn around." And I'll just say, "Oh, I took us the wrong way. We have to turn around." Whereas past me when I first started would have been like, "Oh no, how do I hide this mistake that I made? How do
Mhm.
I, you know, pretend that it was part of the plan?" And now I just let it kind of be. And it's been very freeing, very, very freeing. I've needed to learn to not take myself so seriously. I'm very guilty of kind of getting caught up in my own importance sometimes. So kind of loosening that grip on what I do and holding it really lightly has let me be more of myself. I think that's the lesson. It's trusting that who I am is fine. I might not be the best. I'm probably not the worst, but it's enough and it's okay as it is because that's just who I am.
I mean this from the bottom of my heart. What a powerful and generous, I can't think of another word to describe it, message. Thank
Mm.
you so much.
You're so welcome. It's actually really lovely for me to think about that because and I'll share a quick story with you if we've got time. When I very first was learning to guide, we had to do kind of practice training walks. So we did walks with our friends and our family um, before you start taking members of the public so that you kind of know what you're doing before you're charging money. The very first one that I did was just with my partner. So the person who I love and trust most in the whole world. And we went to our local park and I had written out my little spiel on a piece of paper and I was just going to read through it. I wasn't even going to try and ad lib it. I was just going to read off the script and then we were going to walk around. And I got about 4 sentences into the script and I fumbled some words. And I was so anxious and upset about it not being perfect. I burst into tears. I ended up having a full panic attack. I vomited in the car park. Like I was so
Oh,
worked up and we had to go home. I couldn't recover to continue. And we went back the next day and I did it and it was fine. But I used to hold that so tightly and even the first kind of podcast interview I ever did, I had all the questions written out. And so I had another screen kind of up behind me. And I was just, if they'd asked a question and I knew I had written down an answer to it, I would quickly scroll through and try and find it and just read it, like reading off a script. And so to now be able to say, oh, I just embrace me, it's actually really powerful for me to know that and say that and really feel it. So thank you for that. It's really
yeah.
lovely.
You are most welcome. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really, really grateful to you, Monique.
I've really
Before we,
enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
yeah, before we part ways here, how can, and I'm going to put information in the show notes about how people can get in touch with you, but would you mind just sharing a little bit about the various ways people can contact you to learn more?
Absolutely. So I am on all of the social medias as Heartwood Nature Bathing. So if you think about heart and wood, Heartwood Nature Bathing. I'm also on like LinkedIn and stuff as Monique Ross. So you're welcome to find me there as well. And I know a lot of people listening are probably in the US, so maybe not able to come on one of my wonders, but the ANFT, so ANFT.earth, has a really huge directory of guides in the US. So you'll be able to find someone near where you are if you want to go and experience what you've been hearing about. I really recommend it. It's even in the winter where you are, John, you'll be able to find someone.
Yes, indeed. And my partner tells me, and I had someone else tell me just the other day, there is no bad weather, just ill preparation and bad clothing. So, uh, in just a
Yes.
little while, I'll be out there in it.
In your good clothes, I hope.
Exactly, exactly.
I also have, just while I think of it, I do have online a little recorded guided meditation about waking up your senses that I'll send you the link and maybe you can pop it in the show notes for people. So you can listen to that wherever you are and then kind of have a little experience in your own nature, which I think is really valuable for people as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks so much for that. Well, it's been a real treat having you here. I'm going to go on with my evening, and you're going to go on with your Sunday morning, and we will connect on the other side. And I thank you so much, Monique.
You're so welcome. Thanks, John. It's been so great to talk to you.
My pleasure. We'll chat soon. Wow. What a great conversation with Monique. I'm recording this commentary about a week after our initial conversation. And what has struck me and has stuck with me in this entire time is her insight about the personal leadership lesson that she learns from nature. You might recall what she said was that trusting that who I am is enough. Let me repeat that. When I asked Monique what was one of the most profound insights she has learned from nature, what she said was trusting that who I am is enough. And for me, it's a powerful reminder that being authentic and embracing our uniqueness and the uniqueness of our leadership is far more impactful than trying to fit into a mold or a competency model or framework. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation with Monique. Stay tuned for our next episodes coming very soon. Take care.